Now, 'twas bingo night in Boiler Cove not so very long ago, and Aunt Jose was some excited. She had one number left to go. The caller waited for the ball. It seemed to take forever, so she drank some Pepsi, braced herself, and thought, "'Tis now or never." The jackpot was 1,000, and the hall was deathly still. The also-rans were all fooled up. That would be Jim and Bill. Aunt Josie had 24 cards and kept track of 'em all. The boys had won between 'em, and even that was spoiled. It seemed as if a lifetime passed before the ball was dropped, and Josie never blinked an eye. Her breathing almost stopped. And then the caller had it, and he held it up to see. Then he looked out at the players, and he said, "Under the B." "Under the B," he said again. "Under the B once more." And then he stuck his finger out and pointed at the door. Aunt Josie jumped up from her chair and said, "My jumpins, Roy! Never mind under the B. What number is it, boy?" But not a word came out of Roy. He sat there like a block. "Roy," said Jim, "I'm all fooled up. You call B9 or not?" But then Roy got his senses back and got his voice in gear. A beer! The people finally turned around to see what Roy had seen. A polar bear was standing there, about 10 feet tall and mean. He showed his teeth, he clicked his claws, he let the great big roar. And just like that, all hands jumped up and scrabbled out the door. Well, not quite all my friends, you see. There were still 3 remaining. Roy was frozen in his seat, and Josie was complaining. The thought she'd lose the big jackpot tormented her and drove her. The bear walked up, looked at her cards, and said, "Missus, move over." Now, Josie wasn't one to be afraid of much in life, and Uncle Jim would often say, "Don't try and cross the wife." But neither was she stunned, and so she up and crossed the hall. The bear sat down, looked at the cards, and said, "Now, caller, call." Roy finally had his vocals back, his eyes upon the door. "B3," he squeaked, and then jumped up and took off up the shore. "Bingo," said the grinning bear. "I guess the jackpot's mine." He grabbed the cash, drank Josie's drink, and left poor Jose behind. After that, no bingo game was safe from Bingo Bear. All up and down the southern shore, the people lived in fear. He'd win the prizes, the 50-50 draw he always drew, and if 'twas cold plates on the go, he'd always have them too. And it wasn't only bingo spoiled, if that was what you thought. He'd go to card games at the home, get seniors all upset. He'd go 15 when he had a 5, it seemed like just for spite. And he wouldn't trump with a whist to the board, and you know now that's not right. And then one night when Bill and Seuss had on the hockey game, he came in through their picture window, broke out every frame. He drank their beer, he ate their grub, he left the place in ruins. Bill used to be a Boston fan, but now he hates the Bruins. The wildlife wouldn't touch the beer. The Mounties stayed away. The politicians wrung their hands and said, "'Tis bad, I'd say." With desperation at the breaking point for far too long, the call went out across the land for a hero brave and strong. All hands was in a terrible state until one night last fall. They hadn't seen the bear well, so gathered in the hall. Aunt Jose was doing good with Bill and Jim the usual torments. They only had 1 card again, and that was all their performance. Then with 1 number left to call, the door flew open wide, and Bingo Bear let out the roar, and then he stepped inside. He challenged all to step outside, but found there were no takers. He ate 10 cold plates, 15 squares, and he drained the coffee makers. And then he walked around the tables, checking every card. He stopped by Josie, said, "Aha!" Josie said, "My lard." The bear said, "On your feet right now, I want those cards, my dear." But then another voice rang out, "Now then, Mr. Bear." The people turned to see who'd spoke in tones so strong and stern. And when they saw her standing there, they felt their hope return. She was the stuff of legends in bingo halls worldwide, and she wore a pearl-handled dabber in a holster on her side. The stories that were told of her were filled with awe and wonder, of how she'd played 6 cards and never missed a number, of how she'd cleaned out Vegas one night there on her own, and how the crowd that ran the place came to her for a loan. SuperNan walked up and stood there face to face, 'cause Bingo Bear, you know, he was still seated in his place. "Now you," she said, "I heard about the trouble you've been causing. You better stop your racket now, be quiet and haul your claws in." "Who's going to make me?" roared the bear. "I'm king of all the halls. I play 6 cards one time, don't miss either call." The crowd was hushed, but those who heard him spoke will tell you was the first they ever heard him talking like a local. "Mind now," said SuperNan, "you thinks you're pretty good. How about we have a jackpot game? That's if you think you could. We'll both play with 100 cards if you think you can manage. Whoever loses leaves this place to be forever banished." Well, Bingo Bear looked doubtful, and his brow began to sweat. Well, I suppose it did. 'Twas hard to say. The fur looked kind of wet. He knew that if he backed down now his name would be Manure. Besides, he liked the southern shore, and so he'd face on tour. Then up he jumped. The table thumped and said, "All right, you're on." Then they stood there face to gut. They were at dabbers drawn. 200 cards were all laid out on top of 2 large tables. The crowd was hushed. They knew 'twas one of Bingo's greatest fables. Aunt Jo said she'd go call her if 'twas no disputin'. The bear said, "Good enough, I suppose, but I knows for who you're rootin'." A retired history teacher from the home whose name was Moore loudly bawled, "Cry havoc and release the balls of war." And then the game commenced, and then the dabbers started flying. Uncle Jim was on the tickets, but no one wasn't buying. The players both were keeping up as Josie called the numbers, so Uncle Bill went out and got them freshy in 2 tumblers. By and by, with half the numbers called, the seniors drifted off to have a game of 45s and get themselves a scoff. A crowd had come from up the shore to watch the Bingo Titans, but in the fuss they missed one thing: the game was that exciting. Bingo Bear and SuperNan were even up till then. The dabbers flew, they dried a few, they used up 9 or 10. But then the bear began to swear, but never smelled a rat, 'cause SuperNan was after turning up the thermostat. Then Bingo's eyes got full of sweat, and he missed out on B2. "Oh, what a sin," said SuperNan. "I'll dab that one for you." The panic rose in Bingo's throat. He barely could hang on. Outplayed, outpsyched, and rendered out, the bear was almost gone. Our hero played her trump card then, an ace of hearts she laid. And yeah, I know you're all mixed up, 'cause Bingo's what they played. And you'd be right, but there's no way that you'd have known that she was also in the card game with the seniors from the home. I'll say one thing for Bingo Bear. He knew when he was beaten, but he never thought a 90-year-old missus would defeat him. The cheers rang out for SuperNan. In the limelight she was basking, the hero of the southern shore, the queen of multitasking. She's back home now, but still goes out to bingo Tuesday nights. But she'll only play a dozen cards. She don't like starting fights. But she'll always come and help you out if your game has gone to rot, 'cause some big oonchick's acting bad and got all hands upsot. As for Bingo Bear, you know he left the southern shore. He's playing chess in Finland now, but he finds it all a bore. He joined a barbershop quartet, but he never sings in key, and there's no bingo, squares or coal plates, up in Helsinki.